Welcome to Homestead Reptile, and today with me is one of my 2023 juvenile grow out. Really nice little guys coming along really well. But today, you can hear the rooster in the background. Today, that's little Romeo back there. I want to talk to you guys about something I have been seeing on YouTube and other places. People using crested geckos as feeder reptiles. So, I breed crested geckos. They're pets to me. But I can honestly understand why someone would want to use them as feeder reptiles. They're pretty inexpensive to feed compared to a lot of other feeder reptiles out there. They're somewhat prolific, not compared to others. They only breed once a year. I've heard of people getting 14 clutches. 14 eggs. I'm sorry, not 14 clutches, 14 eggs in a season. But generally, the average is like 12 to 10 babies in a season. That's once a year. So they have a good number of babies, but not a ridiculous number of babies. So I can understand why someone would want to use them as feeder reptiles. So there's this person on YouTube. He has a podcast. He mostly talks about big snakes. He's had crested geckos breeders on his podcast before, and I basically stumbled into that because he had some crested gecko breeders on there. What is it called? The Trap Pod, something like that. But he mostly deals with these large green pythons. They're an arboreal species. They mostly eat birds, bats, and more reptiles in the wild. And he wanted to give them a alternative diet. And he was talking about his neonates that weren't interested in eating mice, that he had baby crested geckos to feed to them. So, my thoughts. I'm about it. It's nature. I'm personally, I wouldn't willingly sell any of my geckos to be eaten by something else. It'd be like me selling you a puppy and you feeding it to an alligator. Or I can sympathize with the people who keep fancy pet rats. I've had rats before, and you sell your well-bred fancy rat, and someone throws it in to be eaten by a snake. My only concerns are they humanely dispatching the geckos before feeding them off? There's one thing I absolutely hate, and I think if you do it, you're kind of not a good person, is willingly and knowingly feeding a living thing to a snake or a lizard. I'm not talking about insects or fish. I'm talking about rodents, lizards. It's wrong. It's not cool. It's wrong. I don't like it. It happens in the wild, but they're not in the wild anymore. If they were in the wild, they would have a chance to get away. They would have a chance to somewhat fight. In the wild, snakes get bitten up all the time by the things that they're trying to eat. Lions get their faces kicked in by zebras. They're not in the wild. So I just don't like that aspect of the reptile community. There's like a certain group of people, and they're normally big snake people, that like to throw living things and to be eaten by their big snakes. And it's sad, and it's wrong, and it's slightly disturbing. But beside that, I have learned something very interesting about crested geckos. So I keep garter snakes, and I have a possible new morph or a new locale phenotype that no one else has in the community. Super gorgeous Baja Blast and his girlfriend Gordita. I'll show you some pictures of him right here. So they're worried, the people I'm working with, because normally geckos are like the number one carriers of Cryptosporidium. I'm sorry. So there's two variants. There's a lizard variant and a snake variant. They are both deadly. There's no cure. Once they have it, they'll either live with it and have no symptoms, or they just die within like months or years. It's like a slow wasting away, killing disease. So they were worried about it because leopard geckos have it. I don't have leopard geckos. I have crested geckos. And I was talking to my crested gecko breeders, my fellow breeders. It's like, have you ever seen this pop up in your collection? Because all Googling it like crazy. Not just, I want peer review, actual research, not just Google says this. I can't find a single documented case of a crested gecko dying from it or even having it. So the person I'm working with has contacts to a lab that he uses to test his snakes for Cryptosporidium and other diseases. And he talked to the lab. I gave him the scientific name of Coralophus ciliatus. And they said they have only had one crested gecko come in that died from it, or they believe didn't actually die from it, from Cryptosporidium. So this gecko was tested positive for Cryptosporidium, but they believe he didn't actually die from it. He died from some other illness. But there are thousands of samples. Crested geckos can both carry the lizard variant and the reptile variant and show zero symptoms, be clinically fine, and they tell, like, if you're a crested gecko breeder, don't even bother testing. It's like, if the likelihood is they likely have it. But the interesting thing about crested geckos is they can live with it. You'll never see a single problem with it, but their shed level of Cryptosporidium is super, super low compared to other species. So Cryptosporidium is a parasitic protozoan, and it's basically spreads through feces. So your gecko poops, something else comes across that poop or eats the gecko, and it gets Cryptosporidium. So Cryptosporidium does happen in the wild. It's just less common. It's more common in captive environments. So crested geckos can have it. They have such a low shedding of it that it doesn't really affect most other species in your collection. But as long as you don't play with your geckos and play with your snakes, and you don't let them have tea parties, you're likely going to be fine. But using them as a feeder reptile might be sketchy. So there's another species of gecko that is more overpopulated than crested geckos, leopard geckos, and you don't see people using leopard geckos as feeder reptiles. It's because everyone knows, if you're working with leopard geckos, the likelihood they have crypto is like super high. They don't even test for it unless a collection is showing symptoms. So that's why leopard geckos aren't used as feeder reptiles. And crested geckos, because they are pretty much asymptomatic, they show zero symptoms. You could be feeding your expensive baby neonates a rat poison. So again, this illness, it kills over time. It will either kill it quickly, or because it was weak, or a slow lingering death. It's kind of like reptile parvo. So if this was interesting, like and subscribe and leave your opinion. So again, I don't necessarily like this, but it is what it is. Like and subscribe.